And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in the exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's June the 29th, 180th day of the year. 185 days remain to the year, and end of the year, we'll start a new one. Now, I hope this Monday has been good for all my listeners. The 1927, the first trans-Pacific flight was completed. U.S. aviators Lester Maitland and Albert Hagenberger landed their Bird of Paradise aircraft in Oahu, Hawaii. They had just completed a nearly 26-hour journey from Oakland. And in 1972, U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Furman versus Georgia that the arbitrary and capricious application of the death penalty was a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which temporarily halted capital punishment across the country, no matter how much folks deserved it. Well, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. Sometimes strange things. Well, Mamdani-backed socialists look to take the New York playbook nationwide after some primary victories. I don't know why. With all the lessons from history regarding communism and socialism, the left is continuing to try to instill that in this country. Hours after their ballot box victories in a handful of congressional primaries in New York City, Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, set their sights west. They wrote on social media, today the East Coast, next week the Mountain West. That post came after DSA aligned Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, 32-year-old far-left community organizer, ousted incumbent Democrat Representative Adriano Espaillat, Congressional Hispanic Caucus Chair, and State Assembly member Claire Valdez, another socialist, won a congressional primary by beating an established back candidate. And those victories are heavily supported by socialist New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani, further emboldened the far left to take as it takes on the center-left establishment in the high-stakes battle for the future of the Democratic Party. I think we're seeing the end of the Democratic Party, at least as it's been constituted in the past, with the socialists moving heaven and earth to try to instill their silly-ass way of doing things across this country. We'll see how things go. Iran agrees to halt attacks as high-stakes nuclear talks loom after weekend military strikes. President Trump's threatening to re-escalate U.S. attacks on Iran after the regime in Tehran continued attacks on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran launched strikes against both Kuwait and Bahrain this weekend, leading to condemnation from both Arab neighbors. Israel and Lebanon agreed to the framework of a deal that would see the IDF withdraw from southern Lebanon. Israeli officials say will not only withdraw, they will only withdraw if the Lebanese army deploys against Hezbollah. An Iranian lawmaker warned that Tehran will continue to control the strait, declaring other nations have to submit to Iran's rules. Britain's Home Secretary condemned attacks on Bahrain, Kuwait, and shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, urged for an implementation of the recently signed U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. And Iran's supreme leader urged prosecutors to take legal action over U.S.-Israeli strikes, accusing the two countries of committing crimes against Iran. And Washington and Tehran agreed to halt military strikes in the region with delegations scheduled to meet tomorrow in Doha, Qatar, for talks. And U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, said Iran has never been so isolated across the Middle East and dismissed Iran's claims of dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. Jacob Frey praised the Somali community as Minnesota faces a renewed scrutiny over fraud investigations. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey told members of the city's Somali community over the weekend they're our family, pledging solidarity and praising their contributions to the city during remarks celebrating Somali Independence Day. His remarks came as Minnesota continues to face scrutiny over several high-profile fraud investigations, and weeks after a Republican-led House Oversight Committee report alleged the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's administration failed to act on repeated warnings about widespread fraud in the state social services programs. Through the most difficult of times and through Operation Metro Surge, we all saw that they tried to come for some of us, Frey told members of the Somali community on Saturday. When that happens, we say that you're coming for all of us. Well, I wonder if who he is trying to convince. Well, a lawsuit's been filed after a tree dubbed the Widowmaker fatally crushes a man at a Texas barbecue restaurant. Family of a Texas father of 4 suing after the man allegedly fatally crushed by the preventable falling of a diseased pecan tree while he was eating at a barbecue restaurant. Kirk Foyle, 64, died after May 19th when a tree fell on him at Green Mesquite Barbecue in Austin, Texas. That's according to the lawsuit. The tree was hanging over an outdoor patio area where he was eating as storms moved through the area. The tree, which was referred to in the complaint as the Widowmaker, was located at 1410 Barton Springs Road, but parts of the tree extended into Green Mesquite's outdoor patio area where Foyle was seated, according to the outlet. Well, anybody who eats in the patio during a storm, especially in Texas, pretty much is asking for problems. Jenny Ogamiki's defense of Alicia Thomas reinforced everything critics say about the WNBA media. It takes remarkable intellectual gymnastics to watch the NBA suspend Alyssa Thomas for striking Caitlin Clark in the throat. Still argued the controversy driven more by optics than by the hit itself. But that's exactly where parts of the league's media landed. When Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas hit Caitlin Clark in the throat last Wednesday, the league eventually corrected the official's mistake by upgrading the play to a flagrant 2 and issuing a 1-game suspension. Now, there's a lot of hard feeling toward Clark, and I don't think she's done anything to deserve it. Well, Lockstar has been forced to issue a plea after a shocking incident at a Philadelphia tour stop. Noah Kahan issued a stern warning to his fans after a messy situation. Viral video picked up steam Saturday after Kahan's The Great Divide tour stop in Philadelphia appeared to show pieces of fecal matter on the floor at Citizens Bank Park. The Stick Season singer pleaded with future attendees to prioritize restroom breaks before admitting he once had his own on-stage excrement experience. If you have to poop at a show, please, dear God, go to the bathroom. He said, I poop my pants as much as the next 29-year-old, but you guys got to understand there's a venue worker out there with a 1,000-yard stare after dealing with that. Well, certainly that is a interesting issue to have to address. J.T. Poston posted 12 on a single hole at Travelers Championship in a stunning meltdown. Golf humbles a lot, including those who are the best in the world. Just ask J.T. Poston at the Travelers Championship on Sunday. What started out as a chance to put a low score on the card at the 13th hole after getting greenside in 2 shots. Poston, the world's number 32 and the the official world golf ranking, posted a 12 in an absolute meltdown that derailed his entire day. He may not have been in contention, wasn't picturing himself at the bottom of the leaderboard by the end of the tournament, but the 12 was the main reason behind finishing 6 over and 1 under on the tournament for 69th place out of 72. I guess you could say he was having a bad day. Well, Rachel Cruz warns young men are throwing money away on a habit taking down a generation. The Ramsey Show co-host singled out reports betting it especially dangerous for men in their 20s. Rachel Cruz is warning young adults, especially young men, that chasing quick money through sports betting, cryptocurrency, and risky real estate moves would put their financial future at risk. Cruz, a Financial Coast best-selling author and co-host of the Ramsey Show, told Fox Business the mistake she sees young adults make constantly is buying into fast-track wealth strategies. She said, one mistake is we see young adults making constantly, honestly, and it's driving me crazy, is online gambling or quick wins to wealth building. Things like crypto or getting into real estate when they shouldn't. Well, I've known a lot of folks that went for the quick buck, didn't do too well. Mississippi law could create a statewide registry of undocumented immigrants. New Mississippi law set to take effect this week would allow the state's top law enforcement agency to compile a list of all illegal immigrants living in the state, alarming immigrant advocates who fear it could be a new tool to target immigrants as part of the President Trump's mass deportation plan. That law, which will go into effect on Wednesday, states that the state's Department of Public Safety may use all reasonable, lawful, investigative means available to determine the number of illegal immigrants residing in Mississippi and their identities, including by collecting their names, addresses, country of origin, and whether they're an adult or a child. The department may also list any criminal history and the date, location, and status of deportation proceedings. Agencies instructed to share information on immigrants suspected of violating laws with state and local authorities. You know, the sanctuary movement has done everything possible to try to stop the deportation of undocumented immigrants. Unfortunately for the undocumented immigrants, they have not been totally successful. Famed economist warned us about big government power and a young lady named Katie paid the ultimate price. She was a 20-year-old college student, had dreams and plans and friends in the future stretching out in front of her. January 19, 2025, while visiting friends in Urbana, Illinois. She was sitting in the back seat of a vehicle stopped at a red light when an intoxicated driver slammed into it at nearly 80 miles an hour. Katie and another young woman were killed. 3 others were seriously injured. Well, unfortunately, that's not a lone event by any means, and it's considered a preventable tragedy. Maria Bartiromo celebrates her American dream journey during America's 250th anniversary. DHS Chief Mullen clashes with Jake Tapper over Haiti deportations after Supreme Court temporary protective status ruling. Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullen clashed with CNN's Jake Tapper Sunday over deportations to Haiti after the Supreme Court allowed President Trump's administration to end temporary protected status for Haitian and Syrian immigrants. He said, I understand that, but based on everything I've seen, including the UN and Human Rights Watch, it doesn't sound safe for Haitians. On 8,100 killings documented last year, and those weren't Americans, Tapper said. Haiti is among the top 5 countries with the highest rates of rape and sexual abuse, more than 1,200 cases of sexual violence last year. That's not Americans. 1.4 million people have been displaced. Those aren't Americans. Well, Mullen asked Tapper as he continued his rant. Is there a question in that? And Tapper began by asking whether all affected migrants would be deported or when the removals are going to start. He said, will you be deporting all of them? Will they all be deported back to their home countries, Haiti and Syria? When will these deportations start? It's going to be immediate. Bolin said TPS was not intended to become a permanent immigration status and said beneficiaries had time to pursue other options. He said temporary protected status was never intended to be permanent. Unfortunately, a lot of folks treat it that way. Well, Tom Brady gives the Raiders a harsh reality check after the team won only 3 games in 2025. Las Vegas Raiders had a disappointing few years. They've not had a winning season, haven't made the playoffs since 2021. And the team had won more than 8 games in that stretch, which concluded with a 3-14 season in 2025. And last year's futility landed them with the number 1 overall pick of the 2026 draft. Tom Brady, minority owner of the Raiders and Fox's lead color commentator, put the organization on notice in a recent interview on the Stick to Football podcast. He said, I expect a lot of improvement from where it's been. Last year, we just underperformed in every area, and it's everybody's fault, and that's the reality. Nobody did a good job. There's not one player in the organization, there's not anybody involved that did the job to the level that it needs to be done. Everybody needs to improve. And it starts with me, and it filters down to the rest of the players on the field. And they got to go out there and got to perform at a high level. Well, we'll see if anything comes of that. Well, Airbnb deploys anti-party technology ahead of the July 4th weekend. Minors under 18 are prohibited from having accounts, and adults face financial liability for violations. Airbnb is rolling out its anti-party technology ahead of July 4th weekend to address the risk of disruptive parties in communities across the country and one of the business travel weekends of the year. Company said its anti-party technology looks at a range of factors to help identify attempted bookings of entire home listings that could pose a higher risk of an unauthorized party and redirect those guests to alternative accommodations. And guests are redirected from booking an entire house, can instead book private room listings and hotels in the Airbnb platform. This is the 5th year in a row we've run these defenses for July 4th. Last year, they redirected more than 20,000 people from high-risk bookings over the holiday weekend, according to Raj Kaiser, Vice President of Fraud and Safety Operations at Airbnb. That kind of capability improved year after year is what it takes to help make the holiday great for our hosts and guests and communities around them. And we'll see what comes of that, if in fact it's as effective as they say it is. Well, country singers facing a backlash for patriotic flag display ahead of America's 250th birthday. A lot of folks have become anti-American flag, which makes absolutely no sense. If they don't like the country, there's the border. Leave. Well, Alex Murdaugh returns to court. His defense argues for a retrial move after the clerk scandal poisoned a jury pool. The Alex Murdaugh's murder case is headed back to court this morning, and the shadow of the clerk of court scandal unraveled his convictions and gave one of America's most notorious defendants a shot at a second trial. He's the disgraced former South Carolina attorney convicted in the 2021 murders of his wife and son before his convictions were overturned. He's expected to appear at a 10 a.m. status and scheduling hearing in Lexington County, South Carolina. It'll mark his first court appearance related to his potential retrial since he was sentenced in his sweeping financial crimes case in March of 2023. And the hearing's not expected to dive into the grisly murders of his wife, Maggie, 52, and her younger son, Paul, 22. They were found shot to death near the dog kennels at the family's hunting estate known as LaSalle in June of 2021. Instead, these proceedings are expected to focus on scheduling and discovery and other procedural matters as prosecutors and defense attorneys begin mapping out what could become Murdoch's second murder trial. Well, archaeologists uncovered freeze-dried potatoes older than the U.S. and excellent condition. Archaeologists in Peru recently uncovered an unusual find. Freeze-dried potatoes date back centuries before the U.S. was even founded. These potatoes, known as chuño, were found in Tambo Viejo site in the Acari Valley in southwestern Peru. Discoveries recently published in the Journal of Field Archaeology. They date back roughly 500 years to the time of the Inca Empire, according to Phys.org. Potatoes of the ancient food, photos of the ancient food showed two wrinkled, brownish, freeze-dried potatoes still appeared to retain their shape and color. Look strikingly like modern-day produce. Preservation of the potatoes is excellent, according to Lidio Valdez, an archaeology professor at the University of Calgary who led the excavation. We'll see if more information comes to light. Well, sisters and a friend have been charged in a Texas mother stabbing death. Two sisters and a friend were charged with murder after a 32-year-old Texas mother of 5 was stabbed multiple times in broad daylight and later died, according to authorities. Kitty Mia Diaz, 21, Amaya Cookie Diaz, 19, and Kendra Renee Faz, 21, were arrested Thursday on charges of murder in connection with the fatal attack. The Del Rio Police Department wrote in a press release posted to Facebook. The victim was identified as Carolyn Caro Pena, 32, according to local media reports. According to Pena's childhood friend, Zelina Ochoa, she was one of those people born to be a mother, fighting back and wiping off tears during her interview. She really loved being a mother. Del Rio is a city of 35,000, southwest Texas, near the Mexican border. Well, on that note, let us see what stories we're going to talk about today. I got a strange one that was sent to me. There's been a lot of discussion about the fact that we beat the Russians to the moon, but after we left the last time, we didn't go back. So the question has long been, what's the real reason we didn't go back? You know, for those who have an interest in space exploration and have followed the history of the space program, it's long been a source of frustration that NASA never returned to the moon since Apollo 11 landed there in July of 1969. In recent years, fresh talks have been underway to make a return, but now we're in the middle of the 2020s, and as of right now, we're still waiting for that fateful return. So it does make you wonder, why did it take so long, and why didn't we just keep going to the moon and the first few landings took place? We showed we could do it. For those who know the history, let alone people who are old enough to have actually lived through it, when Apollo astronauts landed on the moon in 1969, continued to do so throughout the early 1970s, it seemed oddly anticlimactic when those landings suddenly stopped. Like a crew of eager mountain climbers reaching the top of Mount Everest only to declare they'd never ever go back again. Just seemed odd. Why spend all that money and all those resources to get to the moon and then never go back? Official reasoning given by NASA is, of course, somewhat mundane, largely chalked up to budgetary constraints and a change in priorities. And let's face it did cost a lot of money to go to the moon, and by the stagnation of or stagflation, I guess I should say, of the late 1970s, the expenditure of money and other resources just seemed too great. But was that really the reason? I mean, going to the moon hadn't really gotten any cheaper. But suddenly in the 2020s, The Artemis program has brought on a certain surge of interest in moon exploration. And it costs just as much money to go to the moon now as it did back then, at least when you count for inflation. So why do we have an urge to go back now? The other reason NASA gives for the sudden seemingly abandonment of the moon last century was simply a shift in priorities at the time. And in a lot of ways, the moonshot was a desperate bid to beat the Russians to the moon. Once Americans won the so-called space race and beat the Russians to the lunar surface, competition ended. Both Russia and America began to look elsewhere to demonstrate their respective supremacy. No longer worried about Russian cosmonauts building bases on the moon, NASA shifted its attention to reusable space shuttles and eventually created the International Space Station. Now, eventually the shuttles were scrapped. Now private rockets from the places like SpaceX rule the roost and the forefront of the renewed push to return to the moon in the 2020s. And this return, of course, is partially fueled by China's emergence as a space power. Its own determination to claim the moon as Chinese real estate. The official narrative would have us believe that a brand new space race is now afoot, and that's why we're picking up where we all left off. Of course, that's the official history we know, but is that really what happened? There have been a lot of long-standing rumors that something entirely and shockingly different occurred during those first fateful landings on the moon. There's a conspiracy theory that when the astronauts landed, they discovered they had company. It's been suggested from various shadowy sources that there were aliens, complete with huge spacecraft, parked on the moon when Apollo astronauts arrived on the surface. According to conspiracy theorists, the reason why this shocking welcoming committee was not seen on TV during the famed broadcast of the moon landings was because it was withheld from the public. Conspiracy theorists claim that what folks saw on their TV was either highly edited, fabricated, or maybe both. That's an interesting conspiracy theory in and of itself because it dovetails to the infamous "the moon landing was fake" conspiracy theory that we've talked about before. Traditional fake moon landing theory proposes that the whole thing was false and nobody ever actually landed on the moon at all. Where we were warned off conspiracy theory differs, though, is that it borrows a little bit of both worlds. Because while it doesn't deny Apollo landed on the moon, it insists that some of the footage shown to the public really was fake. There's a UFO researcher named Stephen Greer. Talks at some length about this in his book called Unacknowledged, an expose of the world's greatest secret. In his book, he brings up the fact that when the Apollo astronauts were seen struggling to put a flag on the moon's surface, July 20th, 1969, the flag actually appeared to move and flap about as if caught by a gust of wind. And that makes for a heroic, even patriotic moment as these American astronauts, who are also military veterans, salute the U.S. flag on the lunar surface. But there is, of course, one big problem with the notion of freshly planted flag on the moon is flapping in the breeze. There is no breeze on the moon. Moon has no real atmosphere to speak of, so there shouldn't have been any wind blowing the flag around. And Greer pointed to this as evidence that the flag planting segment of footage might have been pre-recorded, not on the moon, but on the Earth before the astronauts ever left. But if the moon landing itself was real, why was this part fake? According to Greer, NASA discovered that alien bases were on the far side of the moon before the astronauts ever left the Earth. Now, alien bases on the moon. That's the discovery of the century. It would have been headline news. Still, if you weren't too keen to believe any of the conspiracy theories about alien cover-ups, it wouldn't be too hard to imagine NASA being hesitant to immediately rush forward news about the discovery of the alien artifacts without first considering the ramifications of how the public might react. In fact, NASA at its inception was specifically advised not to do that. It's now well known that in 1960, just prior to NASA embarking on manned space explorations, they commissioned what was known as the Brookings Report. Now, the Brookings Report was a detailed research paper written by a prestigious think tank, the Brookings Institute. These esteemed analysts and researchers were tasked with brainstorming the right approach and contingency plan should NASA encounter either aliens or artifacts of an alien civilization. And this report advised keeping that information from the public. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory by any means. This is actually true. The Brookings report went into great detail about how it could disrupt civilization. The report states, openly speculating about the possibility of not just alien life, but the artifacts they might have left behind throughout the solar system and beyond. According to what the report said, it's conceivable there is semi-intelligent life in some part of our solar system, or highly intelligent life which is not technologically oriented. And many cosmologists and astronomers think it's very likely there is intelligent life in other solar systems. Face-to-face meetings with it will not occur within the next 20 years unless this technology is more advanced than ours, qualifying as to visit Earth. Artifacts left at some point in time by these life forms might possibly be discovered through our space activities on the Moon, Mars, or Venus. Now, this report, of course, was compiled at the start of the space program. It's not stating aliens actually exist. It's merely suggesting the possibility that they exist. This is a think tank group commissioned by NASA after all, and their job is not to go out and prove the existence of extraterrestrials, but to merely think about the potential implications of those discoveries. And without going into the exact word-for-word text, the report then basically suggests the discovery of an alien civilization on another planetary body, whether the moon or an actual other planet, might shake society to its core. It might be a good idea to withhold that information from the public until the exact ramifications of that discovery can be better understood. Now, NASA does acknowledge that the report was completed by the think tank and insists that although such recommendations were made, that doesn't mean that they necessarily abided by them. Now, Greer insists since NASA was indeed quite spooked when they first sighted possible alien structures on the moon and decided to abide by the recommendations of the Brookings report after all. They didn't know what might happen when the Apollo astronauts arrived, so they filmed a fake moon landing in a studio right here on Earth so they could quickly switch to this more prosaic footage if necessary. It's supposedly the preferred fallback position, rather than treating the American public to a shocking live feed of aliens walking right up to the Apollo astronauts. Now, this, of course, is admittedly quite far-fetched, and for a few reasons. Despite the obvious bizarre notion of aliens and alien bases on the moon, it seems to be a bit of a stretch that NASA would send humans to the moon, knowing that potentially hostile aliens are on the surface. Now, as mentioned before, these were actually hardcore military men, but still, would NASA really embark on such a risky venture without knowing how the aliens might react? Now, these, of course, were brave men, and NASA was indeed hell-bent to get to the moon before the Russians. So, of course, anything was possible. But if it's true, the risk taken is hard to fathom. But if you keep an open mind and entertain the possibility, there's another interesting facet to this. If NASA really was so determined to get to the moon, they would hurl astronauts into a potential lion's den of hostile aliens on the lunar surface. It's worth noting that alternate speeches are known to exist of what an American president might say should a moon mission prove fatal. Now, the text of this alternative speech does not mention aliens, but in the case of a crash or some other conventional fatal failure of the mission, the words were written to address the deaths of astronauts. And in those heady days of moon exploration, it seems all the bases were covered, and all contingencies were considered well ahead of time, just in case something unpredictable happened. So it wouldn't be impossible to think that NASA might have taken some extreme measures to get to the moon and were prepared for things beyond the imagination of most of us. In any case, Stephen Greer's take on what might have happened is indeed incredible to comprehend because he claims the astronauts were in fact confronted by aliens on the lunar surface. According to Greer, the Apollo astronauts were immediately made aware of large craft parked at the edge of a distant crater near their landing site. And not only that, the aliens were roving about in E. 'T. 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 ' on the lunar surface. It was apparently right after the astronauts were aware of this activity, NASA cut the live televised feed and switches to pre-recorded stock footage showing astronauts peacefully hopping about on the lunar surface. It was likely filmed in Nevada, according to the powers that be who claimed to know all this. Although the footage was cut, ham radio operators allegedly still picked up some of the audio transmissions, supposedly heard the astronauts referencing aliens. These references were at first in code, referring to these beings as Santa Claus and bogies on the moon, but then more blatant references to alien craft were also overheard. Well, there's continuous remarks about how they're here and watching us. Apparently, nobody thought to record these transmissions at the time. They've since, if they ever did exist, disappeared into the ether. But this conspiracy theory had gained more traction in the 90s when it was claimed that the late, great Neil Armstrong once openly admitted he and his fellow Apollo astronauts were indeed confronted by aliens on the lunar surface. Armstrong's also supposedly cited this as the real reason why astronauts went back to the moon. He supposedly remarked during a conversation, quite frankly, we were warned off. This is apparent that the whole basis of the conspiracy theory that ETs, who were already making use of property on Earth's moon, told American astronauts in no uncertain terms, get off the moon and don't come back. Well, there certainly is a much more exciting reason for the several decades absence from the moon, and the more logical, practical reasoning behind the delay. But if one understands history, logistics, complicated policy of governments, and a whole plethora of other reasons, they might reconsider. Christopher Columbus, for example, first landed in the Americas in 1492. Now, back in those days, that was an incredible feat, almost akin to the moon landing. It required tremendous financing and resources. He did make a few follow-up missions, just like the Apollo astronauts did. But over the next few decades, exploration of the Americas was really hit or miss. It wasn't until the 1520s that European exploration and colonization of the Americas really ramped up. It took decades after the initial landing to really get a footing in the Americas. Could the same be said about the moon? He was landed in 1969, did a few follow-up missions, and took several decades to get our footing well enough to establish a permanent presence in hopefully the late 2020s. That would be the more prosaic, logical explanation. Certainly not as exciting as aliens warning Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin off the moon. Knowing Buzz Aldrin, he probably had a few choice words for these pesky aliens who dared to accuse him of trespassing. It's believed Buzz Aldrin shouted through his comlink, "What, your moon? This is my moon," before the folks at NASA reined him in. Well, Artemis is scheduled to send a new generation of astronauts circling the moon this year, actually. Maybe landing them there in 2028. Let's hope they don't face any unexpected encounters with territorial ETs vanishing from the moon's surface again. Well, there's long been a theory that I've heard discussed many times. Some of us have traces of interdimensional angels in our DNA. In fact, in the book of Genesis, find one of the strangest sets of verses in the Bible. I'm talking about Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Reading between the lines, these verses seem to suggest otherworldly entities crossbred with human beings. From the modern perspective, this sounds more akin to stories of alien abduction than holy discourse. Now, UFO lore has long been filled with claims that aliens from other worlds are abducting people, extracting genetic material, and creating hybrid creatures that are half human, half alien. But right here in Genesis, the Bible seems to suggest the same thing. The only real difference is the terminology being used. Now, back when Genesis was written, humanity had no concept of aliens. Humanity had no concept that there were other planets which aliens might visit. In fact, humans had no way to even know that they themselves were on a planet. Most people back then thought that the earth was flat. They didn't know that their sandaled feet walked about a round ball of a planet, which orbited one star among trillions and trillions of other stars, which also have planets orbiting them. This is by no means to suggest that the Bible's wrong or to denigrate the beliefs of those who feel the Scriptures divinely inspired. I mean, the Bible could very well be completely inspired by God and still reflect the limited understanding of those who wrote divinely inspired words. Because unless God sat down with the prophets and painstakingly explained everything from the roundness of the earth to quantum physics, divinely inspired or not, the words written still reflect the limited understanding that the writers had at the time. This means that if beings with non-human intelligence suddenly dropped down on planet Earth, our shocked ancient human witnesses had no way of knowing they might have hailed from another planet, maybe from some far-off star system. They could very well have been the same kind of aliens folks talk about today. But for them, they would have been messengers from the heavens, or as some refer to them, angels. They were seen coming from above, so for them, that likely meant they were divine, or at least at one point were divine before they fell from grace. Moving beyond the potential similarities between what these biblical verses describe and the modern-day claims of alien abduction and crossbreeding with aliens, there's a good conspiracy theory. These verses, although only briefly alluded to in Genesis, have long sparked tremendous debate and fascination. Thousands of years ago, scholars of Judaism were fascinated by them. Was references to a patriarch named Enoch who seemingly vanished without a trace. This is another vague biblical musing which seems to suggest God raptured Enoch up to the heavens while he was still alive. And somewhere along the way, more detailed stories about the brief biblical mentions of both the Nephilim as well as Enoch emerged and converged in the so-called Book of Enoch. Although not considered official scripture, this book details how supposed fallen angels, at least from their perspective, arrived on earth and interbred with human women to create hybrid creatures. It's a fantastic story. We're not going to go into every detail of it here, but one of the most shocking parts of it is in regard to Enoch's great-grandson Noah. There's a startling reference to Noah's birth in which Noah's father Lamech is shocked at the appearance of his son. His son is described as having light blonde hair and white, almost rose-tinted skin. That probably didn't sound that unusual to us today. It probably sounds like somebody who hails from Scandinavia. The thing to keep in mind, though, was that the Book of Enoch was written by Middle Eastern people in the Middle East, where genetic traits like that were apparently not too common at the time. And from how the Book of Enoch describes the reaction of Lamech and everybody else who saw Noah, those features are most certainly not common to them, and Noah looked unlike anything they expected. Or as Lamech put it, I have begotten a strange son. He's not like an ordinary human being and looks like the children of the angels of heaven to me. His form is different, and he's not like us. It doesn't seem to me he's from me, but from angels. Lamech was certain of this fact, immediately began accusing his wife of having slept with angels. His wife, Bathanos, swore this wasn't true, or at least she didn't remember an encounter with angels. But that brings up another clue for conspiracy theorists. Because if today's alien encounters and encounters with otherworldly visitors in the ancient past have similar events, it could be that Lamech's wife was either unconscious when the otherworldly entities impregnated her, or they wiped her memory of the event. Because of modern alien abduction accounts, that's precisely what abductees claimed has happened. It's a common trope of alien abduction narratives for the human to be taken aboard a craft, either in an altered consciousness state or to have some of their memories wiped out entirely. In any case, Lamech's poor wife swore she didn't remember anything about being with any angels and insisted the child was Lamech's, even though it didn't look anything like Lamech. The story then narrates how Lamech remained troubled until Enoch confirmed the child was indeed his, but merely had the mark of the divine on him as a sign he would lead his people through a terrible calamity. That calamity was also known as the future flood. But there's something that seems strangely lacking about this account. It builds up at the start with Lamech's great shock that something's obviously very different about Noah. Then almost anticlimactic when the narrative ends with Lamech being reassured, despite the oddity of his son's appearance, he was indeed his child. No other explanation for this occurrence is given other than it was a divine appointment of destiny. Lemmick's reaction, as well as the reaction of his wife and others around him, make it clear that this kind of angelic intervention in human lives was indeed a possibility. His wife, Bathanos, vehemently denied it, didn't do so on the grounds of it being bogus. For her, it was apparently a very real trespass that she was being accused of. She did everything she could to assure her husband she didn't have an extramarital affair, even with an angel. Although Noah was apparently later in the clear, the Book of Enoch narrates this phenomenon of interbreeding between humans and angels throughout its contents. Enoch, in fact, affirms the real reason for the flood was not the everyday sinfulness of humanity, but to wipe the earth clean of the angelic hybrids that were terrorizing the planet. The Book of Enoch goes into some detail to explain the great deluge as simply the drastic measure that had taken to correct a very drastic situation. But were the half-human, half-angels entirely wiped out? Could their DNA still lurk within the veins of some of us? There's some conspiracy theorists who believe in this possibility. They point to many various alleged proofs they've uncovered, one of which is the rare blood group known as Rh negative. Most people on planet Earth have Rh positive blood. There's a rare subgroup that affects about 10% of humans known as Rh negative blood. No scientific explanation for this difference in blood types, but it holds some very odd irregularities when compared to the rest of humanity. For one thing, Rh negative women have great difficulty bearing children from Rh positive men. Their body reacts to an Rh positive baby as if it was a virus and tries to kill it. Their blood's actually reacting to the Rh positive blood of the fetus they carry and actively creates antibodies to attack it. So think about that. Women with immune systems programmed to kill their own babies. Seems to be a very strange occurrence. Now, to this very day, it's only with immunosuppressing drugs that Rh negative women can carry Rh positive babies to full term. Without modern medicine, the Rh negative women would seem relegated to only be able to successfully procreate with other Rh negatives. So the question becomes, why would this be? If it's a natural phenomenon, why would certain humans evolve to only be able to procreate with certain other humans and immediately physically reject embryos conceived from unions with those who are not Rh negative? It's indeed a strange piece of the puzzle, and some conspiracy theorists believe these unusual features are a mark of genetic interference between humans and non-human entities. Could those with Rh negative blood have some remnant of DNA left over from otherworldly visitors from the past? Another interesting fact in all of this is that some reports of UFO researchers contend that a very large portion of those who claim to be alien abductees in the modern era have Rh negative blood type. Could it be that angels, also known as alien, genetic benefactors, have taken a renewed interest in some of their stock? As far as conspiracy theories go, this is one that's both ancient, shocking, and apparently, or at least according to those who believe in alien abductions, one that still circulates in the 21st century. Well, there's a lot of strange conspiracy theories making the rounds. One that I heard the other day involves Princess Diana. She was a modern-day princess, the wife of Prince, now King Charles, and literally worshipped by many. Love for the captivating combination of her stunning features with her charming personality. Extremely popular with the public. Perfect for the role. Unfortunate things just didn't work out between her and Charles. The couple split and went their separate ways. This left Princess Diana, which you might refer to as a royal adrift, but even so, she's still routinely in the headlines. Not because she did anything to merit it, simply because paparazzi news hounds were constantly following her every movement in order to make those headlines. In fact, she was actually fleeing from the paparazzi press when she met with a tragic accident that ended her life. Of course, not everybody believes it was an accident. Seems that almost as soon as the news of her death broke, there were folks out there suggesting maybe it wasn't an accident after all. Maybe Princess Diana was actually murdered. Diana wasn't the only person to die that day. The boyfriend she was seeing at the time, Dodi Fayed, was also killed. His wealthy, well-connected father, Mohammed al-Fayed, was devastated by the loss, of course, and he became an early proponent of the Princess Diana conspiracy. Mohammed is interested in knowing more about what the British intelligence community might know about Diana and Dodi's death. In fact, Mohammed wanted the British intelligence might have been involved. His determined interest to dig up information on this subject, though, led to a less than scrupulous character from Austria, crafting a bogus set of paperwork and falsely attributing it to the intelligence community. Rather than linking British intelligence, it seemed to link American intelligence in the form of the CIA. Now, the CIA denied any involvement in Diana's death, but for conspiracy theorists, denial has a funny way of seeming like an admission. And those who wanted to believe that there was a conspiracy afoot would expect the CIA to deny involvement. They certainly wouldn't admit it. Or at least that's how a conspiracy theorist's mind seems to work. August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana was killed, whether by accident or not. She was in Paris, France at the time, enjoying an evening with her boyfriend, Dodi. Just finished a dinner at the fancy Ritz-Carlton, which Dodi's father actually owned in Paris, when they tried to make a quick exit in order to avoid the press. And the press had already caught wind of Diana's evening location, but the couple had a plan to sneak out back and quietly slip away. Unfortunately, as soon as they made their exit, the press discovered they were leaving and swarmed all over them. This led to a rushed, haphazard exit as Diana and Dodi's driver, Andre Paul, sped off. Besides the friends' way the group left, Andre Paul himself was a little rattled. Later be learned, in fact, he'd been drinking as well as taking antidepressants, which likely clouded his judgment. Didn't seem to worry about the speed limit, at least, as he rocketed out of the hotel parking lot with paparazzi in full pursuit. Might have left the reporters in the dust, but as he swerved into a tunnel, he lost control of the car. Ultimately, everybody in the car that day would die except one passenger, a man named Reese Jones, who was the only one of the bunch who had been wearing a seatbelt. Sadly, the paparazzi did catch up to their prey, only to find they were mostly dead or dying. Before the police could get there was even some egregious enough to slap a few final photos. That was the sad end of Diana, who ultimately couldn't outrun the press. But if you were to believe the conspiracy theorists that claim her death was somehow deliberate, you have to ask one question. Why would that be? One of the most common motives given is a pure and simple prejudice. Some claim that the royal family feared Diana becoming deeply involved with Dodi Fayed because he was of an Islamic background. Claim insists the royals were aghast at the notion Diana might marry and even produce children with Dodi, bringing an Islamic influence into the royal family. Well, that theory was promoted early on by conspiracy theorist and researcher Sherman Skolnick. Skolnick claims that a British royal family that had already been rocked by the painful divorce of Diana and Charles was already at its wits' end. Simply couldn't tolerate Diana remarrying Dodi, making a Muslim man Prince William and Prince Harry's stepfather. Another quite popular theory is one which involves the idea that Princess Diana was bumped off at the behest of Charles simply so he'd be able to marry his own longtime girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles. That is ex-wife Diana, complicating things. So Princess Diana's tragic death still remains a source of much conspiratorial chatter. Raises quite a lot of questions still. And I think Charles is finding that Camilla Parker Bowles was not the end-all be-all he thought she was going to be. Well, we're just about out of time. Not enough time to go into another strange conspiracy theory, and there are a bunch of strange ones. On that note, we'll come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.